Welcome to the Knowledge for Men show. Your life will never be the same.
Your level of success will seldom exceed your level of personal development.
I want to die empty of regret. I want to die empty of my best work. We don't understand who we are. Instead, we're living out somebody else's narrative.
What one man can do, another man can do. If it's been done, it can be done again.
Being yourself and being your truest, most authentic self in every moment. If it scares you or makes you a little afraid, do it. Follow your heart and your gut.
The first stage, I think, is finding you, like finding out who I am today.
Stuff will not work. You will have things that fail. Success is when you're a happy, fulfilled person. How do you define success?
It's your life, and you are the creator of the movie script that is your life story.
Attention, if you are a frustrated man who feels like he is not getting the results he wants in his life, health, wealth, relationships, and personal growth, then I've got a powerful free video training for you to help you become a strong, grounded man so you can unlock unlimited power in your life, business, and relationships. Go to kfmconfidence.com to get instant access to this training. Again, that's kfmconfidence.com. If you want a Cliff Notes version of the best material that I've learned after 300 interviews on this podcast about being a stronger, more powerful man, then it's all here at kfmconfidence.com. All right, guys, welcome to the show. I'm here with Jack Kornfield. He is one of the best known and most respected meditation teachers in the world. He's a psychologist and founder of two of the largest Buddhist centers and communities in America. He's one of the key teachers who introduced mindfulness teaching to the West. His books are classics. He's sold over millions of copies, translated into over 20 different languages. And he's spoken and taught at major universities like Harvard, Stanford, UCLA, and Berkeley. And his latest book is No Time Like the Present, Finding Freedom, Joy, and Love Right Where You Are. Jack, welcome to the show.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. And Jack, let's dive in with, how about a favorite success quote or a saying that you've lived by that's helped you on your journey?
So this is from Carlos Castaneda, who wrote about the Tales of Don Juan, all his best-selling books some decades ago. He says, look at every path closely and deliberately, try it as many times as you think necessary, and then ask yourself and yourself alone one question. Does this path have a heart? If it does, the path is good. If it doesn't, it is of no use.
And so how has this applied into your life?
Well, if you look back over the decades and even if you reflect in some way, if you have the privilege of being with people at the end of their life and they kind of think about what mattered, what really mattered, there's very few things because you got to leave stuff behind. Did I love well? Did I love the people around me? Did I love the earth? Did I love those that, the things that mattered? Did I give myself to life fully? And did it have heart? Was I doing it because somebody else said it was the right thing to do, or because the culture told me to do this, or this is some outside model of how I should be? Or did I really listen to what really mattered to me in my own heart for my own life? And that may be very different messages than the world outside gives us.
I think absolutely, and especially right now too. What do you think are some of those biggest regrets that you've seen common amongst men towards the end of their lives?
Well, one of the things I hear is nobody regrets that they didn't spend enough time at the office.
Right.
And I think more deeply than that, people regret if they didn't make an adventure out of their life. That's an important regret. I wish I had taken more risks and had more adventure. That's a deep regret. And again, I think people don't, when they look back, they regret if they haven't really given time to those they love, to the things they love, but more than that, to the people and the things that they care about. That becomes the measure at the end. Did I love well? Did I care? And did I live in some passionate and fuller way?
Yeah. Why do you think these regrets are so common? Why is it so frequent that there's just some key things here, like not having worked so hard? Did I love more? Did I take more risk and go on that adventure? Why would we not do those things when it makes perfect sense when we're younger to do those things?
All right, so a couple things. I was invited by one of the senior professors and by an assistant dean at Stanford Business School to come down and do a day or two of teaching for the entire student body on mindfulness and compassion and the kind of trainings that I do both as a psychologist, but also because I spent all those years training as a Buddhist monk, and I put these things together. And when I got the call and talked to them, they said, we have these tremendously accomplished people coming in here, people who've, come from the very best schools and they're top of their class, and they're all coming to Stanford Business School, and they've already worked very hard at pushing themselves to be very successful. And they come in here and immediately they try to get a great internship at a big company, and they're visioning where they're going to work and the stock options and how much money they're going to make. And by the end of a couple of years, they've lost touch with all the other important things in their life because they've been so taken over by this. And can you come down and help us? They've lost something. And I listened for a little bit and I said, well, it sounds like what you want is something like soul retrieval. And they said, yeah, that's kind of the right territory, right. which was a funny thing. I did go down and I brought the CEO of, one of the top companies in America with me, who is a longtime meditator, and I brought the vice president of another huge corporation who is a colleague and friend and meditator and so forth, to talk about their experience. And in it, they shared the same kind of message that we're talking about, that yes, they worked hard, and yes, there were, great things to succeed in, and they had to work particularly hard to try to have a balanced life. And the culture of their companies and the culture of the business world and the culture otherwise doesn't necessarily pay attention to that. And yet the underlying thing of success is really the success of, are you living a beautiful life for yourself and your loved ones or your family or whoever it is? There's another reason why we have these kind of difficulties, and that is Ann Wilson Schaaf, who writes about this in a book called When Society Becomes an Addict, says the best adjusted person in modern society is the person who's not dead and not fully alive, somewhat numb, a zombie. Because if you're fully alive, you constantly say no to many of the unhealthy processes of society, the racism or the polluted environment, the arms race, drinking unsafe water, eating carcinogenic foods. Thus, it's in the interest of our society, and the consumer society especially, to promote those things that take the edge off and keep us busy with our fixes and keep us slightly numbed out and zombie-like, whether it's entertainment or consuming or the rat race or all the kinds of things. In this way, the modern consumer society itself functions as an addict. It keeps us going, promising some kind of, fulfillment at the end. But the point that was made, and the students at Stanford Business School were saying, you mean if I make $100 million or $50 million or whatever I make, I might not be happy if I've spent, 100 hours a week for, 2 decades doing it? And the people who'd done it said, you might not be. You have to look at your life itself.
Mm. What do you think happens to a man who lives his life as a zombie for the majority of his life?
I think that there's a kind of deep sorrow in it, that there's some way. I mean, we can live, and all of us do, in part conscious and in part not so conscious ways. But if you're not really attentive to your dreams in some important way and attentive to what you care about, then you numb yourself. And if you might even call it a kind of betrayal of your soul or something deep in yourself. And when that happens, over time, life itself loses its spark and its joy. And then you get to all the other things, literal addiction or depression or things like that, and lack of satisfaction. And the beautiful thing is that there's an alternative to this. And I've been part of leading men's retreats for 35 years or so. I was a partner for quite many years with Michael Mead and James Hillman and Robert Bly, who started in the 80s, the kind of men's movement and gathering. And one of the things, go ahead.
The Iron John, that was his book.
That was Robert's
Yeah.
book, exactly. And
Yes.
Michael Meade had a book called Man in the Water of Life. And one of the things that was true and been repeatedly so in these men's retreats is that we get, 100 men, 200 men, a group of men together. And very often they'd stand up and say, no one told me really what it's like to be a man, or even very well how to be with other men. I know how to be with other men on a sports team when we're competing. I know how to be with other men in kind of some business where we're competing in some way or collaborating. But how to actually be brothers with men, how to have a deep connection, and how to also see that, we as men don't have to follow the cultural model of work 100 hours a week and do everything you can to get the money in the house and whatever. And I'm certainly for success, and financial success is a great thing, but not to do it at a cost of our soul. And this was the conversation that these men wanted to have. And we lose stuff. There was a kid whose father was a professor at a university who taught in the art department. He was also a great artist, and he taught drawing and painting and so forth. So he was headed off to his job one day, and his 5-year-old son said, where are you going? And Dad said, well, I'm going to the university, where I teach. And the little boy said, well, what do you teach there, Dad? And he said, well, I teach people how to paint and draw. And the little kid looked at him with his eyes wide and said, you mean they forget? And there's some way in which there's a spark that's born in us as human beings, a kind of both creative spark and a spark of innocence, and something kind of mysterious that comes in with each human being. And my friend Malidoma Somé, who is a West African shaman and medicine man, who also has 2 PhDs, one in the US and one from the Sorbonne in Paris. And he says among his people in West Africa, the Dagara people, he said they believe that everyone who is born comes into life with a certain cargo. This is a West African metaphor, like the ships that carry cargo up and down the West African rivers. And the point of your life, what makes you happy in some deep way, is to sense what is your gift or your cargo, and then find a way to deliver it. And it can be as simple as raising good kids, or starting a conscious business, or becoming a healer, or becoming a successful athlete, or whatever your particular gift is. But sensing what it is that you have to give the world, and finding fulfillment and in that. Mm. And then there's another thing. Well, go ahead. Ask me another question.
Well, I'm taking away. This is a powerful message. There's a lot of nuggets I'm picking up. I'm taking notes. You mentioned earlier about, men not knowing how to be brothers with other men, how to be around other men outside of perhaps sports or business settings, and really develop those deeper connections. What would you say are some of those biggest lessons you've learned about how to be with men and develop those stronger connections?
Well, one of the things that became really important in these many, many years of men's retreats, and then different men's groups that I've been in, is to actually set aside some time to be with men that isn't just in a competitive thing like sports, and not necessarily just going out and drinking, but when we came together, either as a group of buddies, and it can be a sort of informal men's group, or in these formal groups. We also said deliberately, this is going to be a place where we can also tell our stories, and we can talk about what's going on. We can get real with each other. And so what happened is, one time the theme would be divorce, and a bunch of men would talk about, well, I almost got divorced, or I did, or here's what's going on for me. And they helped each other. Or another time it was fathers and son. Oh, my father was like this. Or, yeah, I had father like that, only it was worse this way or better. And people started to talk about the wounds they had from their fathers and the lessons they learned. And these are the things that men had never talked about with one another. And as they did, first of all, they became much more like brothers to one another. They really understood each other, and they learned from each other. And so there was something really powerful and fine about it. And there's a way in which, if we're not competing, then we can begin to hold each other with a different kind of respect, if you will. Respect that we're all going through these difficult journeys of nobody tells us exactly how to be a man. And when you all of a sudden share it with others, they say, yeah, this is what I've learned. And yeah, I understand. I'm sympathetic. That part's hard. Or here's what's helped me. Those things become really important. I also think, just as another story, in one men's retreat that I was running, there was a guy who said to me, he said, actually, the group we were talking about, our work and so forth, he says, I have a blues radio show in the Los Angeles area, and plays on a public radio on Sunday nights, rather. And one day I got a letter. A lot of the guys who listen to me are also guys who are incarcerated in prison, in those huge racist poverty prisons that have millions of people in them. That's kind of crazy, that have also become our default mental hospitals. And there are so many men in there who don't belong in there. Anyway, he said, so I got a letter from this old guy who said, I listen to your show all the time, and I'd like to ask if you could play some of these pieces from the great early blues masters, Blind Lemon Jefferson and Mississippi John Hurt, and maybe, Muddy Waters. So a couple of weeks later, he said, I got a letter from this guy, Joseph Johnson, and he seems to be a real aficionado of the blues. And to you, Mr. Johnson, who knows so much, I'm going to play Blind Lemon Jefferson, this piece, and this Muddy Waters, and so forth. He did that, and then 2 weeks later, he got another letter back from Joe Johnson, who said, I really thank you for the show and the music, and I want you to know that's the first time I can remember in my life hearing my name said with respect. Mm. And you can imagine what it's like for a man to not be respected because of the racism or the class or the circumstance. And there's some way in which we want to be respected. I mean, we want to be respected for who we are. Right. And then we have to find that, we have to find a place where we can listen to and respect each other, because we're all messed up. We're all kind of doing this by Braille. Nobody has the manual. This is how you be a man. We learn from each other. And when there's that kind of respect given, things start to change for men.
Yeah. Why do you think men don't talk about these things normally, like having these sort of conversations?
I think there's a few reasons, and you would know it as well as I and those who are listening. Partly because of the conditioning, the stereotype, men are supposed to hold it together, and you're supposed to be interested in, basketball and football and sports and, cars and all those things, which I like too and interested in, but you're not supposed to show weakness if you're a man. You're not supposed to have emotions unless you get really angry at something. So you're taught not to stuff your emotions. And you're not supposed to be vulnerable in some way. You're not talking about the difficulty you have. You talk about your successes. There's all kinds of conditioning that we get that's really pretty foolish. And one of the interesting things for me is that I've lived overseas a lot, spent a lot of years in Asia, but I've been in Africa and other parts of the world, and in less developed, economically developed cultures over these many decades. And almost everywhere else, you see men walking down the street with their arms around each other or holding each other's hands, not because they're gay. We have this whole homophobic thing in our culture, but because whether it's in the Middle East or whether it's in India or whether it's in, Southeast Asia or whether it's in Latin America, there's a kind of permission for men to feel like they're brothers with one another and they can be affectionate with one another. And even that is hard in our culture. It scares men because of kind of underlying, not be vulnerable, and maybe an underlying homophobia as well, that somehow we don't know how to handle being close to another man. It stirs up all that stuff that our culture is frightened of. But you go into these other cultures and men hang out with each other and love each other, not as gay men at all, really as very strong heterosexual men, but simply because they're with men, they're with their brothers.
Yeah.
And we're not taught that.
How can
we can learn it.
Yeah, exactly. Let's dive a little bit into that. How can men start engaging in more of those conversations? What are some of the questions, or how can they get started, if you will, when they are with men?
I mean, again, we can't be weird about it, and we're weird enough as we are without adding it some right. other kind of strange thing. Sure. But if it matters to you as a man that you don't have close men friends, First of all, you need to take a little time to do it. And then secondly, you might say to a few guys, I'm just looking for a time where I can sit down and talk with a few of my buddies and kind of make a regular thing. Anybody interested, you can ask the ones you think might, like once a month where we go out or we go to someone's, house or something like that. Kick back, have a beer or whatever it is, and take an hour or two and just talk about what's going on in our lives and support each other. Not very complicated.
Yeah. Very easy to get started, but I think it's just that first, doing it first. And
it scares people. Oh, right. God, can I do that? What'll I do? It's totally fine. It won't hurt you. And not only that, when you do it, it turns out that you discover that you love your brothers. That these guys who are willing to talk to you as you to them honestly really do become brothers, and you support each other. And it's a very fine thing. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. I feel like all men, when someone finally does bring up something vulnerable or deep, or they bring up a serious challenge, it opens the doors for the other men to also do the same. But it's like, yeah, let's have this conversation. This is good. I find it very rare that, if at all, that any man would just, I don't want to talk about this, or they would absolutely deflect someone being vulnerable and expressing.
Yeah. Especially if you're with your buddies in some fashion or other. The other thing that I hear a lot in men's groups is quite simple. A bunch of men will stand up and say, "I'm closer to women than I am to men. That it's easier for me to talk about certain things with women, and I don't quite know how to do it with men because we're not taught how to do it. We in our education, it's like go to gym class or go to sports things or whatever, but we're not given that time and space. And so we tend sometimes, certain men anyway, keep reporting that they rely more on women than men, and they don't even know what the men around them are feeling or thinking. Then there's another thing, and I tell a story in this book, No Time Like the Present, which really talks about how you can start over wherever you are, that it's never too late, and you can make remarkable changes in your life, and you get to start your life over every morning at breakfast, really, and make new choices. And when you start to take a little bit of time to quiet down and listen inside, what really matters? What do I care about? How do I want to live? Those answers sometimes are not what you were taught or told, or even what you got yourself into. So everybody's born with a gift, as I was saying, that kind of the cargo you have to deliver.
Right.
And there's a story of a process in Hawaii where this woman is working with high school students, and she asks people to tell 3 stories: the story of your names, the story of your community, and the story of your gift. And this one young man who's in a special ed class because he can't read very well, can't read up to grade or do math. He says, "What do you mean you're asking me about my gift? Do you think I'd be in special ed if I had any gifts?" And he just felt shamed by the question. So she sees him a couple weeks later, runs into him in the market, and she feels really bad. She didn't mean to shame him. And he says, "I've been thinking about what's my gift." He said, "And my family's, Native Hawaiian here." He says, "And I can't do math very well, and reading isn't my strong suit. But when my family's hungry, I take my spear gun. Almost every day I go in the ocean and I can call the fish, and when I go in the water and I hang there, the fish that we can eat, they come, and I can always put food on my family table." He says, "And sometimes the shark will come, and I look at the shark and he looks at me and I say, 'Uncle, shark, I'm only going to take 1-2 fish, not a lot. All the rest I leave for you.' And the shark says, 'Okay, brother, you cool.' And the shark, he goes his way and I go my way." He says, "And I get these fish, and I bring them home and I bring them back." He said, "I realize that I have a gift. I have something to give my family, and I have something to teach, my children. But we have an education system that mostly focuses on, okay, can you do math, or can you read, or something? And it doesn't say, are you an artist, or are you somebody who's going to climb Mount Everest? You're a mountain climber, a rock climber. Are you, what is the thing that also brings you alive?" And that becomes a really important thing.
is there a balance here? Like I think what men listening might be thinking is, do I have to become this Buddhist? Do I have to? It may sound like, do I have to stop doing what I do to make an income? Do I have to turn it down in order to find joy and happiness?
Well, there's something, I mean, it's a really important question. And there's something called the middle path, you know. I mean, not to tout that particularly, but the point isn't to run away from the world. That would be one extreme, turning down things. And the other extreme would be this, you know, to be driven for success for those, whether it's addictive or cultural reasons and so forth. No, I think it's you don't have to turn things down. You can make choices, and you can choose to really give yourself to a business. You can choose to really give yourself to the work that you do, and you may really love doing it, but take a breath and take a stop and say, with this, what would make, if I were to die in a year or two, you know, a car accident, something happened, what kind of life would I have wanted to live? Do I have time with the people I love? Do I have time to do the other parts that make me a full human being? Do I have buddies to talk to? Do I have ways of sharing, you know, the things that matter to me? And when you do that, it's not saying don't have a great job or don't make the money you want and so forth, but do it in a way that also honors your spirit and your soul. And that's possible. That's the thing. It's actually possible for us. And it's possible for those who are listening to kind of take stock and say, all right, these are the things that really matter. And then you start to shape your own life. Instead of having it shaped by what's outside, you begin to make your own choices. And you know, when you meet a man who listens to his own drummer, so to speak, who has a kind of integrity and, you know, inner strength or courage or dignity, and does something well, whatever their work is, but also knows how to do other things well because they love to do it, and you realize this is not a one-sided person, you go, oh, this is a cool guy. This is a man who really knows himself, and it feels good to you to meet him if those people around that person are also empowered, because this is a man who's true to himself and has a kind of integrity both in the way they act and in the way they make their choices.
Yeah. Okay, I think that clears up that idea. Like, oh, do I have to become a monk and climb up, you know, do I have to go to the
Himalayas, right?
Or no, yeah, exactly. No, I need to wear a robe and sell everything? And there are ways to find the balance, and it sounds like a lot of it is your mindset and choosing where you spend your time.
Yes. And then another part, you know, and since it's part of what's in this book, but also part of what I've worked with for all these years, and why I would get a call from not just Stanford, you know, or Harvard or Stanford Business School, but also from companies like Google or, you know, Apple, or kind of some of the biggest places in the world to come and that is that and this is a really powerful thing that modern neuroscience has shown, that there are ways to train ourselves to be more balanced and centered, to have a greater emotional resilience in difficulty, to quiet ourselves enough through mindfulness and a kind of mindful training so that we can be in touch with our bodies, can be in touch with our values, with our emotions, with the deeper things that matter, with, you know, that soul level, if you will, and that those can be part of what inform our life and decisions. So whether it's having a meditation practice, and it doesn't take long. I mean, I have a program online called Mindfulness Daily at Work that's 12 to 14 minutes a day for 40 days. It's not that long, a little bit of teaching, and then like 6 or 7 minutes of guided meditation. And in the course of, you know, 6 or 7 or 8 weeks, people learn a lot of the skills of how to really listen and track what's going on in themselves and bring it more alive. And the beautiful thing is that when you do that, these tools then help you to actually stay true to yourself. And modern neuroscience says that, you know, within weeks of doing it, it actually starts to change the regulation of your nervous system, and they can measure it in the, you know, telomeres in your cells, and in the way your neurons rewire becomes visible after not that many weeks.
Wow. I've heard so many, great benefits coming from meditation, and you're seeing a lot of even celebrities saying that, meditation is what saved them through their work life, and it's just becoming more of it's not the monks and the Buddhists. It's becoming, I would say, a bit more mainstream. I'm curious here, how do you view happiness, and how would you say most people view happiness?
All right. Well, first, the Buddhist thing. Yeah, there's no need to become a Buddhist. Spare your friends and family. The point is to become a Buddha and not a Buddhist. And a Buddha means somebody. Buddha is the word that actually means somebody who's awake, who's not caught in the kind of unconscious habits of fear and confusion and unhealthy ambition and unhealthy reactivity and so forth, that you're actually awake and present and guiding your life rather than living out of habit. So that's one thing to say. And then what was your question? Let me build on that.
How do you view happiness, and how would you say most of us view happiness?
Well, I mean, that's a question, of course, for each person to consider. Our culture, as I read from the Addicted Society, tends to view happiness as an outer affair. If you have the sailboat and the house, and a good salary and a nice looking, lover or partner, or, hey, you got it made. But my experience is that I've known people who are very happy, who are wealthy, and I've known people who are enormously successful and wealthy who are miserable. Mm-hmm. And I've been in refugee camps and people who have nothing. And some of them have this joyful, happy spirit, and some of them, with the trauma they've gone through, are very unhappy. It turns out that most of happiness, yes, you need a roof over your head, you need food, you need the basics, and for most people anyway, those are really important. As Gandhi would say, God comes to the poor in the form of bread or rice, food. But once your basics are met, then it turns out happiness isn't very much a function of what you have or what you've, garnered around you. It's really the state of heart and mind. That's what happiness is. And the people who are joyful and happy generally are not so caught up in getting things, that they're driven. Happy people aren't driven in that way. They can direct themselves and they can be enormously successful, but there's a graciousness or an ease to it. People who are happy tend to be more generous. They tend to be, connected with others. And all the modern research shows that when you have a network of people that you're connected to and that you care about, that brings deep happiness. Those people are happy who know how to quiet their mind and tend their heart a little bit so that they don't need to just go out and either be busy all the time or do addictive things. And there's nothing wrong with, having a drink or doing whatever you do, but in some way that they feel like they have a kind of well-being in themselves. And that well-being is really powerful. There's a book that the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu did last year or so, each of them Nobel Prize winners now in their 80s and good friends. And Tutu went up to see the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala. It's called The Book of Joy, I believe. And it's based on one question that was asked to them and then a long dialogue. Each of them has seen enormous suffering in their life. Tutu with the whole apartheid in South Africa, where so many people he knew were killed and burned, and and the Dalai Lama can't go back to Tibet and the loss of Tibetan culture and so forth. And yet they're both really joyful people. And I think people go to hear the Dalai Lama teach. Mostly they want to hear him laugh. But somebody who carries so much struggle, he's this great world leader, but he's also lost Tibet and lost their culture and so forth. And he says, they've taken so much from me. Why should I let them take my happiness?
Wow.
And so he and Tutu talk about the willingness to bear witness to the sufferings of life, which we all have a certain measure of loss and difficulty, and the unbearable beauty of being a human being. Yeah. And that what you get to do, and that's what this book is about, is you get to discover how to work with your own heart and mind. You get to choose your spirit. And they can put you in prison. I mean, here's Nelson Mandela walking out of 27 years in Robben Island prison, another Nobel Prize winner, and becoming not only the president of South Africa, but somehow changing the imagination of the world because he had so much compassion and forgiveness and magnanimity and wisdom coming out of prison. They can put your body in prison, but nobody can imprison your spirit.
Yeah.
And knowing this as a man and finding tools or ways of tending this in yourself, as the Dalai Lama and Tutu have, gives you the skills to go through all the ups and downs with a wiser heart and truer to yourself.
Yeah. Do you think that we're born with everything that we need to be happy?
I believe so. In the Buddhist tradition, this is sometimes called Buddha nature or true nature.
Uh-huh.
But there's an original innocence born in each child, an innocence and gifts that are there. And depending if they have a great deal of suffering and trauma, we as men can be traumatized, shut down, become, angry, violent, so forth. Most of the time when I've worked in prisons, for example, most of the guys that I've met who've been lifers or been in there for some major crime and so forth, the history of what brought them to that was enormous suffering. They were beaten. They were, abused. They were impoverished. They experienced racism at every turn in some cases. All kinds of things like that. And the violence that came out of them was generally violence that happened to them as children.
Mm.
So there's something that's born in us that is actually beautiful, that's innate in us. And the thing is that you don't lose it. It's buried under there. But even for those who are listening, that spirit of life is still under there in you, and it's never too late. And you can always start again.
Yeah. Do you think also that happiness is our default state? So when we wake up, we have what we need to be happy, but we remind ourselves of all the challenges and potential traumas from the past or in the current state, and then happiness goes away.
Yeah, let's put it another way, again, using neuroscience. Have you heard of the negativity bias?
I have not.
Okay, so the negativity bias describes how our brain is wired. If you think of our brain as having a kind of primitive reptilian brain and a kind of mammalian brain and then the higher neocortex, okay?
Okay.
We are wired to look for danger.
Uh-huh.
If there are 100 experiences and one or two might be dangerous, that is the one that our primitive brain is scanning for all the time and that we pay attention to. And we needed to, because if you didn't notice, the poison cobra or the, tiger or whatever it was that was dangerous, you didn't live to pass on your genes. So we're wired to be tuned to the problems. And that's, you might have a day of a lot of great, beautiful moments with people and certain success. But if there were a couple of things that turned out really bad, it's like, that's what you remember. And those are the things that make the impact because we tune to that. So it's another actually powerful reason for learning these kind of practices, just as you would practice basketball or practice playing guitar or practice learning how to code, and computer programming. You can actually train yourself to inner well-being, to emotional steadiness and clarity and a kind of deep compassion or care for yourself and others around you. And this rewires or gives the other parts of your nervous system the strength to tune in beyond the negativity bias. So you wake up and there's a sense of well-being that grows in you. And, but we need somehow... So it helps to have a practice of some kind, very, very helpful. It helps to have other men that you can tell your story to. And I think of a moment, one of the groups of men that I've worked with, often with Mosaic Multicultural Foundation, with Michael Mead, James Hillman. This was all born out of the work with Michael and Jim and Robert Bly. We also have done for many years retreats in juvenile halls and working with kids coming out of gangs and so forth. And one of our colleagues is a guy named Luis Rodriguez, who's one of the great Latino poets of the USA. He wrote La Vida Loca, My Gang Days in LA, which he says proudly is the most stolen book in high school libraries across America. And he was the poet laureate for Los Angeles last year. Anyway, when we sit down to begin a retreat or an event with guys coming out of street gangs in Chicago and Oakland and LA and other places, they go, okay, we're going to teach them meditation, read them some poetry, tell them some myths and stories. These guys, they put their hoods up, turn their head, kind of sit in the back and say, right. Listen, man, I'm out on the street with people got 9mm and you're going to give me a poem? You're going to give me a meditation? You got to do something better than that. And so before we start, we'll do different kinds of very, very simple rituals, and I'll give you an example. We'll take a candle and put it on a table and light it and say, we can't begin to talk here because there are too many people in the room who haven't been acknowledged. So would you go out in the parking lot and pick up a stone for every young person you know who's been killed and put it on the table and just say their name out loud next to the candle? And some of these kids will come in with their hands full of stones and they'll say, this is for Tito, and this is for RJ, and this is for Homegirl, and this is for... And all of a sudden there's this pile of stones of young people who've been killed in the undeclared wars in the streets, And then all of a sudden the hoods come off and the eyes are open and say, okay, this is a place where we can get real with one another. Right. We've said their names. Now let's really talk about our lives and what's happened. And then Luis will stand up and read a poem about shooting up heroin in the LA viaduct and what it was like to be in the gangs. And they say, man, you can write that stuff. You can tell. He says, yeah, you got a story to tell. And until you can tell your story and really look into it, you won't have a way to move on from your story.
Yeah. Incredible. Yeah. I really...
So we can heal with one another. We can actually work with the traumas that we carry. And, there's inner ways to do it through the kind of mindfulness things that I've been talking about. Again, things like mindfulness daily or mindfulness daily at work. And there's communal ways of healing. And I work with vets coming back. And the combat vets, they can't tell their stories to most people because people can't bear to hear it. Right. And the thing is, for combat vets, here's the deal. They will say, I can't tell you what I saw. People can't bear to hear the real story of war. But worse, I can't tell you what I had to do. And that's really the weight on the soul of these guys. And when you get combat vets together in a place that is respectful and protected and say, you need to be able to tell your story to others, and you need to be able to do it in a ritual way so that you're not only heard, but you can be honored for all that you went through. And that allows you to put it behind you and not just keep carrying it as a secret in your heart.
Yeah. Yeah. Is this a part of how, is this human to heal with other humans through sharing? Are we not meant to heal just by keeping things inside of us, alone and not getting support?
So as Homer Simpson would say, duh. I mean, look at it. There you got a crying kid. A little baby. Are they supposed to just heal themselves, or do you pick the kid up and hold it? It fell, it's got some pain or something like that. We are wired to be together. We are wired to support each other. And when we hear one another's stories, there's something that when they're genuine, when you talk truth, there's something validating and empowering that we're also survivors as men and we know how to do this. Yeah. And you hear, oh yeah, this guy went through this. And I'm going through something like this too. And we support each other. This is what it means to be human.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's one of many takeaways from this whole show here is reach out for support, and you can find your peace and joy through the support of others. Well, this has been fantastic so far. I just want to ask you a few last kind of rapid fire questions here. So I want to take us into the knowledge round. So Jack, are you ready for the knowledge round?
Whatever it is.
Have you ever felt like you weren't the strong, grounded man that you're capable of becoming? Like there's something more inside of you, but you don't know how to get it out. Me too. Years ago, I was broke, sleeping on my brother's couch, and just got out of a serious breakup that left me on the floor for months. Now, I have a multiple six-figure business. I'm in the best shape of my life, have an abundant dating life, and live on the beach here in San Diego. I want you to break through too and create the life that you want. And because people kept asking me so many questions, I've created this free video training series on becoming a strong, grounded man so that you can have more freedom, love, and connection in your life. I'll also teach you how to build real backbone to boost your masculinity as a man so that you can have more respect, power, and confidence personally and professionally. Simply go to kfmconfidence.com to get this training. Again, that's kfmconfidence.com. Also, I share the #1 conversation that your father never had with you about women. That will be a major wake-up call for 90% of you and will improve the quality of your relationships forever. Go to kfmconfidence.com to get this free training today. Welcome to the Knowledge Round, where the guests will be asked rapid-fire questions to give the audience invaluable pieces of wisdom to help transform their lives. Starting in 3, 2, 1, showtime.
Now, the first question I have for you, what advice would you give to a man who is feeling really lost and is unsure of their purpose? They're unsure of what their cargo is, if you will.
First, I would say that's completely natural because the culture can't tell you, and they don't teach you how to quiet and look inside. And not knowing is already a gift because you realize, okay, this is something I have to find. There is a treasure, so you know that much, but you don't know quite where it is. And then I'd say, all right, now it's time that you don't know that to begin to take some walks in nature and reflect in yourself, to begin to read some things about what it means to find your gift, to talk to other men that you admire, because you'll be drawn to men that have something that you like. And this becomes the part of the beginning of a journey to find that and to experiment. And don't be afraid to, try stuff and you like it and you realize, oh, it's like my son-in-law both my daughter, who's a lawyer, and my son-in-law, they both went to law school. She was at Berkeley and did very, very well and now does a kind of asylum and immigration, human rights law. My son-in-law got a job at a great law firm, worked for 2 years, hated it. He's a very physical guy, and he's a martial artist, and he quit. And he trained as an EMT and a paramedic, and now he's a fireman in Oakland. And he's doing the right thing, and he's so much happier that he changed his direction and realized, I need a little life that's embodied in some way. I can't look at a computer all day.
Right. Yeah.
So that's part of an answer.
That's
okay,
good.
Go ahead.
What do you think is holding most men back from becoming stronger, more grounded men today?
The simplest answer I would give, and of course, it's always ourselves. We hate this looking in the mirror, but it's actually taking time. We get so caught up in, whether it's the work or the social kind of things that we do or whatever it happens to be, family, that we actually don't take time for ourselves. And we also don't take time to connect with one another. And so then we can be driven by anxiety and worry and so forth. And we don't know, nobody taught us how to manage our emotions through some of these skills of mindfulness, for example. You learn both how to track anxiety in your body and your mind, to hear the stories, like Mark Twain said, my life has been filled with terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened, right? So you see the way the mind creates all these stories. You learn how to see what your mind is doing to soften and kind of steady your body in some way that's not so anxious, how to take the anxiety and put it aside. There's skills to do that, and kind of to steady yourself. And then you can learn to do this.
Mm-hmm. Good. Great. And your books here, I want to give credit to your book and the one that we've been discussing, No Time Like the Present, also Heart Work for the audience, The Wise Heart. You have many books on Amazon, great bestsellers. And I'm curious, though, for yourself, Jack, what have been 3 of your most influential books that have helped you on your journey, and briefly why?
All right. That's a wonderful question. So many books have helped me on my journey. So one of the books that's helped me on my journey is a book called Bury the Chains by Adam Hochschild. And it's a story of a group of 12 men who met in a printer shop in England in 1780s and decided to put an end to slavery in the British Empire. And they rode around England for 30 years on horseback, tens of thousands of miles, bringing some well-spoken ex-slaves who described the Middle Passage and the horrors of slavery into the parlors of upper-class British people and to Parliament. And after 30 years, commitment and dedication, well before the American Civil War, they got the British Empire, which was all its economics was based on the sugar trade in the Caribbean and slavery, sort of like oil today. They got them to ban slavery. And so it showed me the spirit. If there are some really dedicated people, the kind of changes, whatever, and for me, I care as an activist too about how we treat one another, that this is what's possible. And there's a beautiful part of it because Thomas Clarkson, who's the main figure there, was aided in this by a number of Quakers who were also against slavery. And the Quakers quite famously wouldn't take their hats off for the king. They say, we only take our hats off for God. But when Thomas Clarkson died, all the Quakers took their hats off, that he was able to pull that off. So there's one book for you. Gosh.
And just a few others. Maybe just briefly, just name their names. What comes to mind as very influential books that have helped you on your journey.
So Dan Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence. Mm-hmm. There's a book that I could recommend. Robert Bly's Iron John and Michael Mead's book, Men in the Water of Life.
Great.
Those are a few.
Great. Yeah, good books. And now this is more of a scenario for you, Jack. Imagine you had 60 seconds with 25-year-old Jack, if you could envision where he's at personally, professionally, in his relationships, all that. And knowing what you now know today, if you could sit down with him for 60 seconds, what would you tell him to do and not to do?
I wouldn't tell him to do much different. I'd say, trust yourself, keep going. You'll be fine. Sometimes it seems like you might not, but just, keep heading in the right direction. And then in terms of relationship, I would say value yourself more. You're looking for, some woman to say, oh, you're such a great man or whatever, somebody to validate you, hang on your arm and look beautiful. And you said, know that you really got something, in yourself that's worthwhile, and they can take it or leave it, but really treasure and value yourself. I would have said that to him too.
I like that. I like that a lot. And now, even if you have to summarize some of your main points here, what would you say is your philosophy on life and success?
I would say my philosophy is that true happiness is a matter of the heart, and that no one can tell you what that means for you, whether it's science or race car driving or being a farmer, or an astronaut or just a parent of a great son and great kids. No one can tell you that, but that you can't, once you get enough basic well-being in your life in terms of a place to stay and so forth, really the happiness is an inside job. It's a matter of heart. And the beautiful thing is that you can learn about that and learn to change your heart and mind.
Yeah, it's refreshing. It's good. All right, Jack, this has been a fantastic interview. I'm curious.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
I'm curious, what's exciting you now today? What are you looking forward to for the rest of the year here?
I've got a project where I'm going to China, a little project I'm calling Returning the Treasure, because in the Cultural Revolution of a couple of decades ago, the Chinese burned most of their texts and closed their temples and kind of did away with all their cultural treasures, Buddhist, Taoist, Confucian. And now that they're becoming wealthy again, they realize that just having a lot of money isn't enough, and they want their traditions back. And so I'm going back to China by invitation to some of the great old temples who read Western things to say, well, here are some of your treasures that we've been using in the U.S., and here's how we found them helpful. We just want to bring them back and return them to you.
That's amazing. Jack, it's been a pleasure having you here on the show, and I want to thank you so much for sharing your life lessons and your story here with my community. For the audience here, you can learn more about Jack. Just go to jackkornfield.com, and let me spell that out. That's Kornfield. I would just throw it in Google, and then Jack Kornfield, it pops right up. Also, head on over to Amazon And you can type in Jack Kornfield. The book that we've been discussing here is No Time Like the Present, Finding Freedom, Love, and Joy Right Where You Are. Jack also does a number of events that you can find out more about on his website, jackkornfield.com. Jack, thanks again for coming on and sharing your story.
And Andrew, it's been a pleasure. And I'll just add one thing. There's a website called Mosaic Voices, Mosaic Multicultural Foundation, that grew out of the work of Robert Bly, Hillman, Michael Mead, that has all kinds of great stuff for men. So if they're interested, they can look at Mosaic Voices as well. It's been a pleasure, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Knowledge for Men podcast. Hundreds of interviews and millions of downloads later, we're continuing to build an international movement, and we're just getting started. So if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and leave a helpful review in iTunes, because it really helps the podcast grow so we can impact even more men in the world who need this. Guys, this is all about living with purpose, where every day you only do things that matter to you. You wake up, live with purpose, and take massive action towards the life you want. And always remember, love the life you have while creating the life of your dreams. Go to kfmfree.com to get a surprise bonus I've made for my listeners. Again, that's kfmfree.com for something that's changed my life, and I'm offering it to you for free. Also, check out my Amazon best-selling books that I've written for you to help you crush life at kfmauthor.com. Again, that's kfmauthor.com to see all the books I've created to help you break through in life. This is your host, Andrew Farabee, founder of knowledgeformen.com, and I'll see you in the next episode.